Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
Strange Things, Volume 3, Story Number 1. When I was younger, my family lived in Okinawa, Japan. My father's a Marine, and we lived in these large apartment towers on one of the bases. For those of you who know, Okinawa was the site of one of the deadliest battles of World War II, and there were a lot of ghost stories that floated around. But my family, being skeptical by nature, never paid any attention to it. One day I heard my mother and one of her friends talking in the kitchen, and her friend was telling her about how the previous night something had pushed her and held her down on her bed. But there was nothing there. I thought that was pretty weird, but again, I was pretty skeptical of these things. A few weeks later, I'm sitting on the couch watching TV when all of a sudden I hear this loud bang come from the hallway. I go and investigate and see that the cabinet my parents had kept their alcohol in was wide open, with all the alcohol arranged neatly on the floor. Scariest part was that the lock that kept the cabinet shut, and my parents didn't want me going there obviously, was laying right in front of all the bottles, broken into three pieces. Story number 2. One morning, my mother, sister, and I decided to stop in and check on my grandmother's house. She was away for a weekend, and we told her we'd stop by and check. My mother was busy taking care of some forms or something upstairs in the kitchen, with my sister who was watching TV. I didn't like the show, so I decided to go into the basement and watch something else. I should add that my great grandmother, who I never knew well because she passed away before I was really old enough to remember, lived in this house up until her passing. The basement had two parts: the normal side with a TV and couch, and the creepy ass old lady basement with missing light bulbs, a lot of old clothes, and a sketchy workbench my grandfather used to use. The two are separated by a door at the foot of the stairs. I was in the basement on the child friendly side, and suddenly I heard a voice coming from the psycho murderer side. "Christopher, is that you?" My name is Christopher. Needless to say, I froze. I sat petrified, knowing I had to go toward the voice to get out of the basement. I sat contemplating my options, as if sitting still would make me invisible. Then luckily my sister came over to the stairs and yelled down, "Chris, Mom says it's time to go." I made her come down the stairs and come over to the couch, and then proceeded to sprint past her and run upstairs. I informed both of them what happened, and neither said they yelled or said anything upstairs that could have prompted me hearing that I was hearing something on a different volume on a different floor. I know some people will think it was my sister, but she never calls me Christopher, and my mother was nowhere near the basement. Story number 3. This is some backstory. I and my sister grew up in our grandmother's house, a quiet neighborhood in Oxnard, California, in very close proximity to the Chinese railroad workers' grave sites. We were surrounded by farms and fields back in the day, and some of our neighbors even rode horses down the block on occasion. It was a quiet, simple, peaceful little place. Absolutely nothing was out of place or outwardly strange. Everything was very normal. Anyway, around the age of 5, my sister and me are tucked into bed, and as all children do, we whispered about our day until we eventually fell asleep. Late in the night, when all the adults had retired to their beds and all the house lights were out, I awoke and turned to see a red brick wall splitting our bedroom in half. Now, I slept on the half of the room in my bed where there was no door, so I sat up and physically moved out of my bed to literally feel this red brick wall. It was a cold night, and I remember feeling that distinct texture of rough brick, cold and solid beneath my fingers. Needless to say, I had a child's instinct to panic. I began to scream and cry out for my mom and for my grandmother. I cried and banged my fist against the bricks, calling out my sister's name. Nobody replied. To this day, I remember the soreness of my hands, and it felt like I'd been slapping my fist and palms on stone for ages. I cried and cried. I remember screaming until my throat was raw. Suddenly, from the outside of the wall, a small hand appeared. Now, this is really important because it frightened me and it calmed me all at once. This hand, small like mine, literally melted through the bricks that I'd been pounding and screaming against. It was like seeing a Dali painting come to life. I remember sucking my breath in and trying not to breathe. Tears, which had been cold in the corner of my eyes, felt warm and thick and new. The wall was moving like it was a fabric, and it was clear that something or someone was trying to get through the wall at very specific points. Wordlessly, I crawled into bed and did what every intelligent child does. I covered myself toe to head with my blankets and pillows and stuffed animals before finally crying myself to sleep. I kept thinking and praying that someone was eventually going to come save me before I was permanently trapped. Still, nobody came, and I must have tired myself out and drifted into a very sad, uneasy sleep. The next morning, when I awoke, I was covered over by every pillow, stuffed animal, and blanket on my bed. I had constructed a small wall of bed things between me and the brick wall. However, now that the morning had come, that red brick wall was gone. I sat up and ran to my little sister's bed. Without hesitation, she sat up and said to me, "I just had the weirdest, scariest dream." I stared back at her, my heart skipping a few beats, and asked, "Did it have a red brick wall?" She turned pale. Even her lips were sickly looking, and she started to cry. We've talked about it off and on for years, and eventually she told me that the experience is still so frightening for her, she doesn't like to talk about it with anybody. It still terrifies her to remember how vividly that wall was constructed between our beds in the middle of our room. Distinct red brick, extremely solid on my end, and absolutely soundproof from my perspective. Still, I asked her if she could hear me when I was screaming through to her, and she said, "I could hear you, and when I tried to reach you, my arm went through the wall. I screamed for mom or grandma because I thought I was stuck, but when nobody came, I was able to pull my hand back through. I tried to get you out, but the wall wouldn't give." This experience, besides being absolutely terrifying and inexplicable, left me with a very sore throat, exhaustion, and even shaved hands the next morning. All in all, this was the creepiest, most horribly paranormal thing I've ever encountered. I hope never to encounter anything like it again. Next story. I've had a lot of really weird experiences happen to me, but this one comes from my brother-in-law. Personally, I think he's a goober, but I still trust him 100%. It was about 2:30 in the morning, and the doorbell of my parents' house was ringing madly. Shocked and confused, all the lights turned on as my father blazed a furious trail to the front door to see who the hell is waking us up at such an hour. We were all surprised to see my future brother-in-law, we'll call him Paul, standing at the door in a state of panic. "Paul, what the hell are you doing here at such an ungodly time?" My father questions as he motions for Paul to come inside out of the pouring rain. With drenched clothes and squeaky boots, he lurched into our boat to reveal that he looked far worse than we had originally thought. Pale-faced and shaking nervously, he could only shudder for a moment in time as he thought of where he should start. And what he was about to divulge might be unbelievable. It grabbed me. That's all he would say for a while at least before he began to finish what was originally trying to say. I've heard it before, and now it's touched me." "What are you talking about, Paul?" my father asked, seeming to inquire for the family. "What's in my apartment?" With mouths gaping and eyes wide open, we each scanned each other's faces looking for cues to laugh, or trying to figure out if he was being serious. He's kind of a joker, so it wouldn't be above him, but this isn't like him at all. We were all silent as we leaned in to focus more deeply on what he was trying to tell us. "From day one," he continued, "I've heard it. Whatever it is, pacing in my living room. Then gradually its path has increased, from the entrance to the kitchen, sink, into my room, alongside the bed, back into the living room, as if circling the interior. Now, let me take a minute to explain the layout of his pad. He lived in an efficiency apartment, so it was square, with the entrance being on the east side. Then there was a half wall partitioning the living room from his bedroom on the north. Walking from the door through the living room, you're directly in the kitchen, then a wall to your north where the bathroom is, so basically an L shape. So this particular night, the pacing starts as usual. He'd been there for nearly a year, so he had grown accustomed to the footsteps, listening as it went from door to sink, then to his bathroom, then retracing his step back to the front door. Except this night was different. As usual, I heard the pacing begin, but instead of reaching the bathroom and turning around back to the kitchen, it kept progressing to my bed, alongside it, then back into the living room, starting its path over. I felt the wind as it passed. I felt it. I've had my run in with the unexplained, so I'm familiar with that feeling. Oh hell, what am I going to do? I can't even see the damn thing. He continued. So as I'm lying there, listen to this thing slowly pace around my apartment, seeming pushing the boundaries, this storm starts to roll in with lightning flashing and rain beginning to pour down. I decided I'll do what I've always done, cover my head like an ostrich and pretend like it's not there. Now, we're avid fans of scary movies, the kind that depict some poor bastard in the exact situation he's in, and I'm thinking, don't do that, dummy. The thing is always on the bed looking at you when you remove the covers. Then he continues. So I'm lying there with the covers over my head, hoping it just goes away or I'll fall asleep, whichever happens first, when I hear the blinds. He had metal blinds, the ones that you barely bend and then they make this terrible sound as they're bending. It started slow, just like the pacing, motioning with his fingers like a velociraptor's claw. Clink, 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 getting faster and faster as it reached the bottom, till it started over. Next thing I know, it had done this so violently the blinds were ripped from the window and thrown across the room. That's when I peeked out, and I saw it. Lightning flashing wildly enough it would light up my room. I saw it standing right at the side of my bed. He went on to describe what I would say is an extremely dark, shadowy figure that didn't have a definite shape, but you could tell beyond the shadow of a doubt that whatever it was looking right at him. After a short pause, he glanced at us, looking up from the floor, and kept speaking. That's when I noticed this burning sensation on my right forearm. Pulling up his sweater sleeve, he revealed what was unmistakably a handprint. But not just any handprint. This hand was giant, far bigger than Paul's, like the hand of some badass cowboy or something. Thick fingers, just a massive hand in general. It was red, like someone had hold of you and you were trying desperately to escape, and tender to the touch, not burned but highly irritated. We all froze. Looking for something to say, we were speechless as my mother got some ointment and my father extended an invitation for him to stay as long as he felt comfortable in our guest bedroom. Needless to say, Paul stayed at our house for quite some time as he broke his lease the following morning and moved everything out. What's even more strange is that the handprint lasted for about 3 days before it began to fade. Next story. I lived in a haunted house that eventually my dad admitted was messed up. But before I got that admission, this is what happened. When I was little, my parents divorced and I went to live with my dad as he was moving to a new town. We ended up buying this big house out in the country outside of a little podunk town. The house was huge for the two of us, but it was right on a little pond with an island, so it was cool. There were other houses around it, but it was basically surrounded by cornfields, which scared the you know what out of me because, that movie Children of the Corn had just come out. That movie terrifies me to this day, and I'm old as shit. Anyway, freaky stuff started happening almost immediately after we moved in. On Halloween, my dad and I bought this huge pumpkin, carved it, and put it out in the front window. We went out of town one night, and when we came back, that shit was smashed in the middle of the living room, 10 feet from where it was sitting. I didn't think much of it because my dad played it off, but I heard him on the phone with his new girlfriend later that night saying how freaky it was. He moved on pretty quick after Mom. Straight player. Weird and random noises happened pretty much every night, and we just grew used to it. Even voices started, but my dad always told me it was the house settling. I've never heard a house say the name Jeffrey when it settles. That was what I would always hear someone calling out. But then there are two messed up instances that happened that scared us into selling the place. Even years later, my dad still talks about how it freaked him out. First, there was one night that we had a really bad storm. I was 10 or so, and my dad was done letting me crawl into bed with him anymore. I had to brave that shit out on my own. Anyway, at about 3 in the morning, as this storm has been raging on for a couple of hours, we hear this loud boom from the first floor. Both of our rooms were on the second. And then we hear glass shattering. My dad yells at me to stay upstairs, and he goes down to investigate. He came back up 20 minutes later and tells me to go to sleep. It turns out our bay window had been blown out during the storm. The freaky thing was, all of the glass was outside the house, not a shard in the room. He got it fixed the next day and never mentioned it again. Second time, we had a pull down attic that was in the hallway between my bedroom and the basement. One night, I woke up to go to the bathroom. As I was walking down the hall, I ran into that effing hanging attic door. My dad was sound asleep in his room, so it freaked me out. However, as I was walking back to my room after I used the bathroom, I ran into the door again. I heard some rustling going up there and figured Dad was up there, so I walked past the attic towards his room, but he was in there snoring. I freaked out and told my dad. He got up, turned on his bedroom light, all angry at me. We both looked into the hall, and even though the hallway light was off, we could tell the attic was now closed. My dad was pissed, told me to go to bed, and turn off the light. To this day, I still turn on every goddamn light upstairs of my current house when I have to pee, much to the dismay of my wife. We moved soon after that, and I've never gone back to that place. Next story. When I was younger, probably 12 or so, my sister was going to the University of Pittsburgh. We decided to go visit her one weekend. We lived in New Jersey, but it was supposed to snow, so we ended up leaving really late Friday night instead of Saturday morning. We got about 3/4 of the way there before the snow got too heavy, and we had to pull over and find somewhere to stop for the night. At this point, we were in the middle of nowhere, up in the mountains just outside Pittsburgh, so there's not much around. We stumbled on this tiny little motel that had 2 or 3 other cars in the parking lot and grabbed a room for the night. That night, I had this crazy dream that I was surrounded by dead people in the motel room. I didn't know who they were or what happened, but I was alone in the room except for like 30 or 40 corpses. The next morning, I woke up and my mom is walking across the room towards the window, and I said to my parents, I had a nightmare that I was surrounded by dead bodies last night. Of course, my mom says that it was just a dream and not to worry. That's when she pulls open the blinds, and not 2 feet from the motel is a graveyard that looks like it was from a horror movie. Dead trees scattered across the field with broken headstones and overgrown grass everywhere. Scared the shit out of my whole family. Next story. The house I grew up in is about 200 years old, perhaps older. My mother still lives in it. When I was younger, I started seeing cats that weren't really there. They'd rub against my leg and run off. We didn't have any cats and it creeped me out, but at the same time, now that it doesn't happen anymore, I sort of miss it. Now, the upstairs is a little weird in layout terms. You go up the stairs, at the top are 2 doors. One goes into my sister's room and the other into my mom's. You have to go through my mom's room to get to mine. I believe it was a nursery when it was first built. When I was in 4th grade, my sister and I were getting ready to go to school. My mom was at work, and since my sister went to the middle school, she left a little early to catch the school bus. I'd always be home alone for about 10 minutes before I left. My sister and I were both in my room. She was getting ready to leave to get on the bus, and I turned towards my door, looking into my mom's room, and saw a floating figure in a dark brown cloak. Its head and face were concealed in a hood. It didn't seem too tall and was floating a good 2 or 3 feet off the ground. It just hovered there. Didn't move. I screamed at the top of my lungs and turned towards my sister and turned back, and it was gone. I told my sister what I saw, and I was so scared I was crying. She had to leave or she was going to miss the school bus, and I begged her not to as I was so scared. I eventually went with her to the bus stop and just waited for my school bus to arrive. This gives me chills just thinking about it. My mom had also heard footsteps coming up the stairs several times. After I saw this figure, the cats quit appearing, and I haven't had any other experiences since then. But my mom's house still creeps the hell out of me. I told my dad this story a few years ago, and he said when he was a kid, he went into his kitchen to get a drink after waking up late and saw two figures just like what I described. Next story. One day when I was about 20 years old, I was in my bedroom at my parents' house, grabbing a pair of fresh boxers to take to the shower and wear after. It was about noontime as I just woken up. Don't judge me, I had a class around 3 p.m. The only ones in the house were my mom in her room and me in mine. I was reaching down to grab my boxers from the cabinet when I heard from behind me a man's voice say, "Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!" It went from a whisper, escalating to shouting. I still remember feeling the breath touching the back of my neck, making my neck hair shoot up. I slowly turned around, anticipating a mental intruder to be standing behind me. When I realized there was no one in the room with me, I immediately yelled for my mom. I was terrified, and yes, I needed mommy's protection at the age of 20 years of age. I ran to her room and found her putting on her makeup to go out. I didn't want to sound crazy and make a scene, so I just chilled in her room, acting like I just wanted to spend time with her. After a few minutes, I mustered up the courage to explore the rest of my house. I searched for the intruder everywhere, but couldn't find anything out of place. I've never been so scared in my life in broad daylight. Next story. In the summer of 2007, on our way back from California, we were driving across rural Nevada in the middle of the night with my boyfriend and sister. My sister was asleep, my boyfriend was driving. Now, rural Nevada is a creepy enough place as it is. A lot of abandoned and rundown places, half ghost towns. At one point, we even explored an abandoned motel. Lots of mattresses with stuffing ripped out. Possessions scattered all over the floor, including wallets and expired prescription medication. Really cool, really creepy stuff. Anyway, so we're driving in the middle of the night, a little two-lane state highway, and in the desert, it's not that uncommon to see nothing but the stars and whatever is right in front of your car. It gets dark, really dark. That's how it was that night. And this was somewhere between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., so completely dead of night conditions. No houses anywhere nearby, no businesses, nothing, no lights. Suddenly, we pass a man walking on the side of the road. We didn't see him for very long, but enough to see that he's dressed kind of like a timeless, red-blooded working man. Check shirt, jeans, and a wide-brim hat of some kind. He could have been from 1890 or 2007. It's hard to say. And of course, at night, headlights bleach the color of everything, so it's hard to say what color his shirt or anything was. Honestly, in my mind, I remembered as sort of a grayscale, not the creepy glowing ghost blue, just gray. But that's probably because it was night and we saw it by headlight. He's not carrying anything, not a light, not anything that indicates that he's there for any purpose. Just walking. We didn't see any car. There's no towns or houses nearby that we can see. It's just desert. There haven't been any other cars or intersecting roads for a long time. He's in our headlights for as long as anything is, probably 30 seconds or so. He doesn't react at all, doesn't flag us down or wave to us or even look in our direction. He just keeps calmly walking alone and empty-handed at the side of the road. Both myself and my boyfriend react eloquently, something along the lines of, what did we just see? I stared out the back window expecting to see a light blink on or something, but nothing happens. We considered turning around to see if he needed help, but wouldn't he have waved to us if he needed help? Also, we were both creeped the hell out because this is rural Nevada in the middle of the night, and what did we just see? Now, I'm a pretty sane person. I look for rational explanations. I'm the type of person who, upon seeing UFO videos, will Google hoax. Not to say there aren't plenty of things out there that are pretty weird and still beyond complete explanation. Bits of quantum physics, for example. But a dude walking down the road should not be beyond explanation. I mean, okay, maybe he was just a hiker out for a solitary night jaunt in the desert, but wouldn't he have at least acknowledged our car in some way? I'm not going to say I totally saw a ghost, but Yeah, I think we did. Next story. In 2004, a couple of friends of mine went to investigate an urban legend about a place called Spook Light in the rural Midwest. What you're supposed to do is drive to this church in the middle of nowhere and flash your lights into the woods, and then you will see lights flash back at you. I thought this was a stupid waste of time, but it was 3 a.m. and rainy, and we needed a break from recording music. The legend is that a child was run over by a horse buggy back in the day, and her head sliced off. No one ever found the head, so her father would look for it day in and day out, and you can see his lantern floating out in the woods at night. That is supposed to be the light you see. The reality is, this very rural wooded land is atop some old mines, and the light seen in the woods is said to be from some kind of gas that surfaces from these mines, creating small fireballs. Either way, I was skeptical the whole time. I was eating a cheeseburger in the back seat, being completely indifferent as we flashed the lights into the woods and waited. Of course, nothing happened. We ended up repositioning the car a few times and flashing the lights a bunch, and the results were similarly fruitless. So we figured we'd exhausted the legend, and we decided it's finally time to go home. And I'm pretty happy about this because it was pretty boring and a waste of time. As we were leaving, I head down this winding dirt road with woods on both sides. My friend in the front passenger seat is like, "Holy shit, what's that?" First, I didn't even bother to look up because I thought he was just trying to mess with us, but then the driver had the same reaction, so I looked up. What I saw still chills me to this day. I look forward and there is a man in a hooded garment and what looks like dirt smeared all over his face, just walking straight out of the woods and right up to the side of the road. He just stared us down and seemed completely unfazed by the rain. We could not, in the moment, explain who this man was or why he was there, but we all agreed, with our screams, that there was indeed a man there. The driver slammed down the gas and we got the hell out of there as fast as possible. As we drove, we were trying to rationalize what we saw. Maybe he was a survivalist. Maybe dealing meth. Maybe doing some kind of springtime rain hunting. We had no idea. But it was one of the most eerie and odd things I have ever seen to this day. Deep down inside, I kind of hope he was just a guy who goes out into those woods on the weekends to scare the hell out of teens and 20 somethings. And even deeper down inside, I hope that we didn't see a ghost. Next story. This is not my story. It's from my ex husband, from when he was younger. So I'm going to share the only one I was involved with. First, I have to tell you, my ex's family had been having all kinds of paranormal type experiences throughout their lives. We were in Oklahoma, and his sister had just purchased some land that was old pasture land and had moved a mobile home onto it. She had mostly moved in and had a couple more pickup loads to get from her old house. We had just unloaded a bunch of stuff and done some cleaning, then headed out to get another load. I watched my sister in law lock the front door, lock the screen door, and check it. I noticed this because my family never locked our doors, even when we left the house empty. It wasn't as bad back then. So, this was of note to me. Made sense, trailer kind of out in the boonies in a cow field. We headed down the road, then my sister in law realizes she left a dish soap, which she needed for cleaning at the old house. Holy crap. This was 30 years ago, and even now, as I think about it, my heart starts to race. Anyway, we had barely gone any distance. I mean, it was less than a minute, and we pulled in, and the screen door is wide open. My sister in law tries the door, it's unlocked. My husband at the time tells her, "Don't go in." He suspects there's an intruder, and he goes around to the back. Suddenly, he comes tearing around the front of the trailer, yelling, "Get in the effing car! Get the F out of here!" He's freaking out, and he will not tell us what he saw. He just keeps telling us, "You don't want to know." I guess we eventually dropped it and left him to keep the secret to himself. Years later, he finally told me what he saw. He said he looked in the back kitchen window and saw this huge guy, a big, ugly man, but with huge fangs and a huge mouth, like nothing you've ever seen, like something out of a horror movie. That family has some shit. I was reminded of another time, probably a year before this, when I was 18 and he was 17. My not yet husband and I were at his sister's house. They had a den downstairs, and in the bathroom down there they had a shower with a shower curtain instead of walls. So he needed to use the restroom, so he goes in there, comes out and tells me quite urgently to go upstairs now. He had started to go to the bathroom and looked over at the shower curtain just in time to see a black hideous looking hand with claws on it pulling the shower curtain slowly open. We booked it upstairs. He had other stories that his mom and other family members corroborated. That family, woohoo. Next story. My best friend's parents owned a farm with a caravan in the paddock. Had a little veranda and sliding doors built onto it. When I was a teenager, we used to sleep in the caravan to get away from our parents. One night, we're all in bed, and I happened to glance towards the glass door and saw the silhouette of a man in a cowboy-type hat holding something like an axe in his hand and standing perfectly still. He looked like he was directly outside the door. My friend had 3 dogs, and if anyone or anything was out there, they would normally react, but I heard nothing from the dogs. I looked away in fright, then looked back a second later, and there was no sign of anyone. I was beginning to think I'd imagined it when one of my friends whispered, "Did anyone else see that?" I just about jumped through the roof and then said that I did. We discussed it, and he saw exactly the same thing. So at this point, we were freaking out, thinking there was a murderer out there or something. Except, if there had been, the dogs would have been going nuts. Our other friends were asleep, and we didn't want to wake them, but we didn't get any sleep that night. Now, we'd seen the silhouette of their dad before, and we were 99% sure it wasn't him. Plus, he doesn't own a cowboy hat, and why would he be lurking around with an axe? But in the morning, we asked him anyway. He had no idea what we were talking about. Plenty of other weird things happened at that farm, but that was one of the weirdest. This particular property was actually in the news prior to them buying it because supposedly there had been some satanic rituals and sacrifices performed there in the past. Who knows if the place is haunted, but it's certainly strange and creepy.